What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. So I have once again been playing the Crew 2 a bit, and there's a question I was asking myself. Were some of the classes in this game better in the Crew 2 compared to Motorfest? Now you're probably like, dude, what are you asking? This is going to come down to a few different classes: the air race planes, the powerboat, the monster trucks, maybe the aerobatics, and the motocross category. The reason why I did want to talk about this though is I feel like a lot of people from playing Motorfest, I have seen it, they're not the biggest fans of how these classes actually feel. One of the biggest ones, guys, I even saw in the beginning of the game coming out, other content creators talked about it, that is going to be the planes. Do you guys like how the planes feel? Now, the issue with it, I would say, is a lot of the planes in the game, though, are actually going to be fairly terrible, whereas a few of them are actually kind of useful. I would say, like the Slick, for example, is pretty decent. Then the other ones are going to be incredibly annoying to actually fly them, keep them in a straight line. If you are doing something like an air race, for example, with like the things you have to fly through, it seems to make it even more difficult to do it. That way you actually have to fly a certain plane, then we also have the other aspect of it, to where some of the planes are going to be incredibly slow, where others are way too dang fast. For example, the PC-21 does like 270 miles an hour, whereas something like the Slick or some of these barely hit 230. So I would say you're probably like, okay, so if we have a speed trap, I know what plane I have to pick there. Then a lot of players are like, bro, I don't want to fly the planes. I don't even want to level them up. I also would probably guess many of the player base at this point probably hasn't even leveled the planes up, man. Like, they don't want to do the events. Probably not the biggest fan of how the planes actually feel. Do you guys also agree that the planes were a mild downgrade compared to the Crew 2? Funny thing is, I wouldn't necessarily say it's awful in a way because they could fix it. They could probably go back to this handling model of the planes in the Crew 2 and then implement that into Motorfest. The thing is, will that actually happen? The other class I did want to talk about a bit, I have been noticing popping up, is going to be the Powerboats. Now, in a way though, I feel like to a certain extent they were most likely trying to make the classes a bit more realistic. Like, do you guys think they were aiming for that with something like the planes, for example? We all do know back in the Crew 2 we actually had the regular air race planes and the aerobatics. Now, Motorfest, they put everything into one category though, and all the planes are basically going to be the exact same thing. Personally, back in the day, I did actually like having an aerobatic plane, because guess what that actually did equal? More events and more things to do in different classes you could level up that you would most likely have to use in the future. Now, I do understand the air race planes are better for like the skills and stuff like that, and the only reason to really level up an aerobatic was for the main events if they were in a summit. But hey, it was another class to mess with and actually try to use and stuff like that. And even the aerobatic planes in the Crew 2 were still going to be better than the actual planes in Motorfest. Like, that's insane to me. That also brings me into the power boats though. Like, do you guys actually like the way they feel? I would say once again they might have been aiming for a realistic standpoint, but does it actually work though? Now hear me out for a second though. I do feel like the power boats in the Crew 2 felt a tad better. The reason why I do say that is they weren't as almost like super heavy feeling, or basically strapping like something to like a refrigerator and trying to turn that thing around tight corners. That's how some of the boats feel in Motorfest. Like that one summit we had recently with the power boat, I was not enjoying the boat that much. Like the way that it felt wasn't turning all that great. Like, I understand like not every single boat is going to turn on a dime or something, but at the same time though, I do feel like the power boats in Motorfest probably could get a mild tweak. That way they're not going to be as like heavy, or just kind of annoying to actually drive them, which is also why I feel like a lot of players probably level the power boats up. Or in the same case, something I was seeing, guys, similar to the other classes, a lot of players don't even have maxed out power boats or nitrochemist sets for them because they don't like using them. Similar to something like a plane, for example, if we have a plane event. Now this is actually going to be a tad different compared to like the older summits in the Crew Motorfest, where we did have plane events where you have to run your own plane and everybody used the exact same plane because none of the other ones worked. But did anybody else notice that the newer powerboat races and the plane races are all basically going to be something like vehicle loans, where you can't use something like your own plane or your powerboat? The reason I do think that's going to be the case is many players don't even have them leveled up because there's not that many fun events to do in them. I did actually make a video, guys, yesterday, which I'm sure many of you did see, but if you didn't, I will leave a tag on the screen for that one, going over a bigger variety of events we had in the Crew 2 compared to Motorfest. I think that's going to play a big factor. But on top of that, though, if the events are not in the game and the actual vehicles are not going to be that fun to use, why would somebody level them up? And if they were to actually spend 5 to 6 hours on it, which I hate to admit this, but for me, the planes actually took around 6.5 hours to get a chemist, and the powerboats took me around 10 hours to get a chemist, so I definitely understand the annoyance of going over the same 3 or 4 events in the game over and over. For that case, it was like 1 or 2 of them. To get a maxed out set, like, players are probably not going to want to deal with it. And again, guys, on top of that, not having the best handling model in them, I feel like a lot of players are like, ha, nah, bro, I ain't using no plane, bro, I ain't using no boat. Now, do you guys also agree, though, would you like to see a similar handling model to the Crew 2 being implemented into Motorfest for the planes and the powerboats? I do feel like a lot of people are like, yeah, bro, please do it, because I have to admit, flying the planes in the Crew 2 were so dang fun going back into the game recently. I was like, bro, these are actually really fun to use, using the powerboats, doing the races. I was having a great time in them. I would then go back into Motorfest. Like, it's not awful, don't get me wrong, like, they're usable in Motorfest, but you can definitely tell some tweaks probably should be made to them. The last class I did want to talk about, guys, I have not seen this anywhere, but I have to give my honest thoughts. That's the motocross bikes. The reason why I did want to talk about this is in the Crew 2, I like the way that they actually felt. Don't get me wrong, I do understand the handling on them probably wasn't perfect. This is not going to be a real motocross game, but I do have to admit the bikes actually felt like they were going to be smaller, very lightweight. You can fly in the air with them and fly around turns and drift and all that. If we actually jump on the Crew Motorfest, though, the motocross bikes feel like a rally raid bike, and that was something I was a bit frustrated with. Also, how does a motocross bike do 155 miles an hour, man? Some of the 450 bikes in real life, which like the KTMs and stuff like that, they can hit maybe 120 or so, 115-ish, and that's also pushing it because that's really fast on a dirt bike. But 155 miles an hour, man, like, I almost feel like they basically took the rally raid bikes and copy and pasted them into the motocross bikes, and then boom, it is going to be a new class, but it technically isn't. Like, they don't feel like motocross bikes when you're jumping. I just wasn't a big fan of them. Anybody else feeling this way, man? Like, I feel like I'm not the only one here. When I was first playing Motorfest, I was like, wait a minute. These motocross bikes feel a little bit weird to me, bro. And then jumping back on the Crew 2 now, I'm like, oh yeah, dude, the motocross bikes in this game are just, they're so fun. You can fly over the jumps, you can drift in turns with them. And to me, though, it just feels a bit more natural when you're using them. And they also do like 108 miles an hour, which is definitely a tad more realistic than something like 155 miles an hour. I just have to be honest, guys, I wasn't the biggest fan of the entire motocross bike line. Basically turning into another version of rally raid bikes, just not all that fun. Do let me know what you guys think about this in the comments below. Do you also agree that the powerboats and the planes probably need some type of tweaking in Motorfest compared to the Crew 2? I would love to see like some type of handling update being added, even though I don't see it happening. That would be so dang dope. It would most likely make the planes a lot more fun to actually be used in the events and stuff like that. And I do feel like a lot more people might actually run the powerboats if many of them did actually feel better. Then of course, I do feel like many players are like, wait a minute, dude. You got a point about the motocross bikes now that I think about it. Would love to see a change with those, but I feel like at this point, probably isn't going to happen. Also, one last thing I did want to add into this video. Would you like to see something like the Jet Sprint or even the hovercrafts return into Motorfest? For me personally, I have to admit, I think the hovercrafts would be dope. Now, hear me out for a second because I know not everybody liked them, but I feel like the hovercrafts were insanely fun to use most of the time. I mean, you can go on water with them, land, you can like drift around in certain places, and I feel like they were actually pretty fun to use. I do understand the jet sprints were probably kind of wonky, also like really twitchy in some places, so a lot of players probably weren't the biggest fans of them. I mean, I could see it, because I do know for a fact a lot of players probably weren't the biggest fans of the jet sprint boats. On top of that, though, the big question I would ask is, how would they actually handle on the Motorfest handling model? It honestly might be a tad scary to see those. But I do feel like having a hovercraft, though, would be a really great time, though. On top of that, guys, I do understand they'd have to add all kinds of events in for them, because a lot of players would want new style of events like we have in the Crew 2, so that way you'd actually have like a new experience in a different vehicle class and new events on top of it, and I do think that would add on to the overall experience. But again, let me know what y'all think about this in the comments below. Would you also like to see the hovercrafts return? And what are your overall thoughts on the jet sprint boats in the comments below?